Welcome to Talking Kootenay Books. My name is Keith Powell. I'm your host. Our guest today is Judy Pollard. Judy, it's great to have you here. And I know that you're a West Kootenay author based out of Nelson. And congratulations on your new book, The Distance. So we want to talk about your book, find out sort of what the inspiration was and a little bit about the story. And when I went through your book, I was really impressed with your sense of place. You really talk about Kootenay Lake and the north end of Kootenay Lake, so we're going to explore that as well. So first of all, what was the inspiration to the book?
Well, the inspiration came to me many years ago because when I was a 17-year-old living in Calgary, going to high school and later university, after a few years, I went to Argenta at the north end of Kootenay Lake and worked for a family, looking after children and gardening and doing all kinds of things. And I heard the story that's in my book, from different people. I didn't ever hear the whole story, but I heard enough of the story that it just stuck in the back of my head because, I heard that there was a murder that had occurred between people who worked together, and of course that was it was a big question mark for me. And so after many years of work and retirement and then making the decision to take creative writing courses actually at college, I found that in the writing of the class, I was actually writing this particular story. And so I realized I need to make a book out of this. It has to be a book. It can't just be little segments. And then as I put the book together, I also started to do a lot of research. So I researched everything I could. I mean, I knew the original aspects of the story, but I researched everything from where people came originally in Europe, why they came, the variety of things that they were involved in, and then I started going through. After I learned more about the murder, I started to really research that very deeply, and how all of the trial could have happened in the way it did. It's a very intriguing trial, actually, and so it just took me very deep into 5 years of research.
I see. Okay, so we're talking about a real life event here. Yeah. But your book is a novel, so how do those two go together? Well,
the events in the book are real, so everything that in terms of the people, what decisions they made, coming to Canada, learning about land preemptions and the reasons for that, all of those things are actually real, but I decided not to use the real names of the people involved in the incidents. So I've changed the names of the family, I've changed the names of all the neighbors who lived around them at that point, and I've kept the names of communities. Actually, I even have surveyor maps of the area that I got from BC Archives that show the communities with the community names, that sort of thing, are in the book.
Okay, so let's give everybody just a little bit of a lesson in geography here and talk about Kootenay Lake and the area that you're referring to. So can you just sort of describe that for me?
Sure. So Kootenay Lake, Kootenay Valley is west of the Cranbrook area, obviously. Kootenay Lake is about 70 miles long, north to south. The southern tip is Creston. The northern tip is Argenta, and Lardo is on the west side of Kootenay Lake. They're about approximately halfway up Kootenay Lake. There is an arm that actually eventually flows into a river at Nelson. So if you go west from the mid part of the lake, you'll come to Nelson.
Right,
so those communities are all right around there.
So that's the Nelson 6 Mile, the West Arm area, that kind of thing. That's where you live, right?
I live just outside Nelson.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why the interest in the north part of the lake? That's a pretty remote area.
Well, I was fascinated as I lived there and I worked there and I got to know people and I got to know their lifestyle. So when I was there, it was 58, 59 when I was first there. Right. And coming from Calgary, so I was a very urban person. I had never lived in a rural community. And so I was very interested in the area and in the lifestyle. And I picked fruit in fruit orchards and that had been built during the earlier time of the building of the fruit orchards. I learned how to milk a cow, you know. So I learned a lot about a rural lifestyle, and that, I mean, I think I would say that it sort of helped me to figure myself out a little bit as a young adult.
So Argenta, Lardo, you know, only recently, and I've lived in the Kootenays all my life, only recently did I actually get a chance to go up there. And, you know, I was impressed how big that country is and how open and spectacular it is. And I always envisioned Argenta as being a little community, but it's a very rural area. And it has some interesting characters. And I think some of those come through in your book as well.
That's true. It's a community of little driveways that go off into the bush, and you don't know where the house is. You know, you come to a garden first before you come to a house. Yeah, there are a number of interesting characters. One of the most famous is Red McLeod, who actually lived in the East Kootenay around here, and was a very famous, you know, up to mischief kind of a guy, criminal, stealing horses primarily from here, being chased by the mounted police out of Fort Steele, notoriously, and waving goodbye at Tata Creek and saying Tata, which the story that I heard was that actually that how Tata Creek got its name was him waving goodbye. Yeah, so he was well known.
I'm not sure if that's an urban or rural legend or not, but that's true. So it really shows a connection between the East and the West Kootenays. There's a tremendous amount of connection between the two, even though there's that mountain range that separates us. So let's just talk about the setting of the book and the era that you set it in. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're talking 1930s, that kind of thing?
Well, actually, the book starts in 1909, which is when 3 men came from Switzerland got a land preemption and came to build fruit orchards. So that's the beginning of the book. And then later, one man died, and then the other 2 men had wives and families, children, so on, and worked together over the years. They did a lot of hard work clearing, blasting, getting trees out and putting fruit trees in and that kind of thing. And eventually there was a lot of conflict and a murder. So they actually they were both married around one of them for sure 1914, and the other one was just before that. So,
and it continues on from there, right, into the 20s and 30s? Well,
the trial in the book is in 1922.
Okay.
And then, you know, the storyteller of the book is my grandfather. I've made him the narrator of this story because he lived in Nelson at the time, and he went to the whole trial.
Yeah, so there's an interesting connection there. So I often ask my guests, is there a personal connection? And your personal connection is through your grandfather. Let's just talk about that for a moment.
Sure. So my grandfather moved to Nelson in 1918. My dad was almost 4 years old at the time. He moved from Vancouver Island. He was a school teacher, and so he was very interested in community. He was a fisherman and a hunter and a hiker, and he fit the Nelson crowd really well because Nelsonites like their hiking and so on. And he heard about the murder, and he had a Walton rowboat, which is a prized possession of many people on Kootenay Lake, this handmade wooden Walton rowboat. He rowed his boat from Nelson to Balfour, which is 20 miles, and then he rowed from Balfour to the north end of Kootenay Lake, which is about 35 miles. So a total of well over 50 miles each way, camping on the way, fishing, eating fish. He luckily had good weather. And when he got back, and he couldn't find anything in Argenta because there weren't many people around then, but then shortly after the trial started, and so he went to the trial in Nelson. And he told my father about this, I guess. I didn't know until many years later when I mentioned to my dad about the story, and he said, "Oh, right, Dad went to that trial. He told me he went to that trial." So I've often wished that I could channel my grandfather, because I would love to hear his version of all these things. It would be so fascinating.
He was an eyewitness, probably sitting in the audience listening to the whole thing.
Yeah. No kidding. That would be something.
So where did you do your research?
I did it, local people, like a lot of people have lots of stories. I did BC Archives. I went to all the archival areas like museums around me. I did many hours in newspapers. So I went all the way back into 1909 newspapers, which is quite, I know you're a researcher too, you know what those newspapers are like. They're huge and the print is very tiny and almost impossible to read. So, you really burn your eyes out looking at those things. You need a magnifying glass. I spent many, many hours going through newspapers and digging out stories out of newspapers that were relevant to the names. I was looking for the names, any stories of the names and what people had done, and some of the events. And one really interesting thing I found in the newspapers that nobody seemed to know, just from my talking with people, was the actual drowning event of one of the brothers that I have in the book. That's not common knowledge. So the story itself, most of it is common knowledge, but when I wrote the book and several people bought the book and read it, they actually phoned me and said, I've never heard of that before. Like, is that true? Is it true that that fellow drowned in the Duncan River? And I said, yeah, I found newspaper articles about it, and the name and the date and so on. And so I thought it was pretty interesting that just going through newspaper articles to the extent that I did, I found something that wasn't common knowledge.
Right. So why do you think it's important to sort of preserve that history, tell that story? I know you've done it in a novel form. Why do you think people should know about the history of the local area?
I think we have a fascinating history. I think that we learn from our history about where we're going in the future. We need understanding of history in order to be able to see where we are as human beings, as communities, as societies, learn about human characteristics and interdynamics between people, the things that people seek in their lives, and the benefits they get out of certain aspects of their lives. I think that it's just really important to understand so much in the past that it's easy to throw the past away, but we need to understand it, because human beings have the habit of making the same mistakes over and over and over again.
Yeah, I've noticed that. Let's just go back to the actual writing and research of the book. So you did this extensive research. You tabulated all the results and undoubtedly made lots of notes and that kind of thing. How did you go from that sort of raw data into crafting a novel?
Well, actually, I knew parts of the story in advance, and I actually wrote little bits of them, like little vignettes. I had some of that. But the other thing I did was I made a storyline on a huge sheet of paper, big cardboard paper, and I started putting dates. And as I researched and found more information, I could locate dates and places and individual names, and so I had this whole picture in front of me of where people came into the story, where individuals came into the story, and I could identify a few events that I could attach to that. And so I had this, I'm sure you're familiar with storylines, and but it was very helpful to me to do that, because
so you basically had it all mapped out.
I had a map. That's right. And the map helped me to proceed and to pull the strings together and to realize where I needed to go deeper and do more research and find out more about that topic, and find out very unusual little bits of information about how people lived, for example. So that was a really helpful thing, and I often went back to it. So I'd write, I actually write mostly by hand for starters, just notes, crazy, wild notes. And then I put it on my computer and I go back and forth a bit. But then by going also to my storyline, I could locate my mind in that map and look for more information, or just look for more description One thing I kept going back to, and you mentioned I've really included, or I've built around the environment. I've built around the setting of this story. And so I would go back to, okay, what is it? What do I smell there? You know, what do I see there? How does it feel? The breeze. How's the wind on your face feel?
Yeah. So you really give us a sense of what it's like. In the region, in the area. So I think Judy, you told me that you worked on the project for like 5 years, and so how do you sustain that? And more importantly, when did you know you were done?
Well. When did I know I was done now? So okay, that's a hard question. Well, I actually, so in terms of who I went to as the publisher is part of the answer to that question.
Sure.
So I went to Friesen Press. I don't know if, are you familiar with Friesen? Yeah.
Based
so
out of Winnipeg, I believe, right?
They are. They're out of Winnipeg. They're a semi-self-publishing organization. But I go to a lot of literary events, and they presented a couple of times, and I was very impressed with the way they explained what they do in conjunction with an author. Because I think a lot of publishing companies are more in conjunction with themselves than the author. And so I decided I'd try them out. I tried them out. I did a little contract, and I had them do some content editing for me and a couple little bits, and then I decided to go with a bigger package with them. So as I worked through all of that, then that helped me get to the termination of my story. But I mean, really, most of these kind of stories, you could go on writing for a really long time. I didn't want too long a book. I mean, I'm not really a fan of really long, really wordy books. I like a shorter book myself.
Yeah, you ended up with a pretty substantial book. I think 200 and some pages, right?
Yeah.
And so you had this experience working with Friesen Press. I've heard good things about them. They often, people may be familiar with their large format community books. They do a number of those. And so let's just talk about that experience a little bit more. Is it something that you would recommend self-published authors to look at?
I definitely do. I will definitely do it again myself, because I feel that I can trust them, that I am still totally in control and ownership of my own material.
Right.
They are a partner in that whole journey of getting something published. However, I think, and other people have said to me as well, like a couple of bookstore people have said, well, you have to be really motivated as an author to make it work to publish through Friesen Press, because there's a lot of work that the author has to put into it.
Right.
And you have to maintain that. Like,
I don't know if you've discovered, Judy, but there's a lot of work in everything you do when it comes to publishing.
Marketing, promoting, I know.
And hats off to you for getting out and marketing and promoting your book, because I think, you know, I've talked to a number of writers, authors over time, and they love their work and they love the fact that they've published a book, but they cannot handle the marketing side of it. And I really admire the fact that you're out and making presentations and talking about your book and that kind of thing. I think that's really important. Anyways, before I get away from the actual book, I want to just talk about the cover, because the cover is very striking. So you've got the distance, you've got this striking photo. How did that all come about, and how much control did you have on that?
Well, first of all, as I got in, you know, well into my book, I started to think about the cover. What am I going to do with the cover? And then I looked at my wall, and on my wall I have a beautiful oil painting, which is actually the image that is on the cover of the book. And that painting is done by a person who lives at the north end of Kootenay Lake, in the valley a little bit past the head of the lake, and she looks straight at the north side of Mount Willett, and that is what she painted. And so I thought, well, that's got to be the cover of this book. That is, Mount Willett is so much a fundamental piece of the story. And so I talked with her. She was fine that I actually use that, and I talked with the the publisher and sent it to them, and they said, "Yep, that can be worked with." Actually, they were very enthusiastic about the cover, and we could work with that. And it was a very interesting process because I was part of designing the cover, which I think is very unusual, actually. I mean, I'm not an artist, I'm, you know, the last thing. But they actually sent me the cover in a format that they had me move little boxes and squares and note things and change things and change the lettering the way I wanted it. It was quite a process. It was it was really fun to do that.
Yeah, well, good. You know, and I've heard the exact opposite story from some authors in that they have lost control and they've been disappointed. So I'm glad you took that initiative and they let you have that kind of input. That's important because ultimately it is your book, and how it's presented is very important. So let's just talk about your presentations. You've been making presentations to various libraries in the area. Last few weeks you've been out promoting the book, and I just wondered, how's the reaction been? How do you react, or how do you interface with the audience? How did that all go?
I think it goes really well. I love doing the presentations. I'm an old college instructor and retired a number of years ago, but I was an instructor for 25 years. And before that I was an early childhood educator, so I worked with young children, and so I really miss the students, actually, and I really like the presentations. People that come tend to be very interested. So I've had a couple of times when I have had a poor attendance, but mostly I've had very good attendances.
How engaged are they?
They're totally engaged, totally. They come in and they right away they want to ask me a question, and then when they listen to it, they listen to the story, you know, I see the heads nodding here and there, ask me some questions, but then afterwards there's again a lot of discussion, a lot of questions about this detail or that detail. And last night I did an ed talk at the Cranbrook Centre, and a couple of the women were chatting with me, and they said, we really wanted to ask you a lot more details, but we realized that's asking you too much about the story. You're just giving away the whole story. We want to know about that and that and that kind of thing, you know. Right. So very engaged. It's gone over really well. I have many people have told me how much they enjoy reading the book, and people from the area have really enjoyed the way I've set it, the setting, number one, because they love the setting so much as I do, so that's a really important thing, and they love the way I've framed the story, and just enjoyed reading it. It was a good read, they'd say to me.
Well, from a writer's perspective, it's always good to get that positive feedback.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, when you have an audience and they ask questions and they're engaged and whatever, it really makes the effort that you put into it well worth the while. And
it does, yeah.
And you've invested a lot into the book, not only in energy and time, but I'm sure financially as well. So it's nice to see you out and promoting the book and working with your audience and answering those questions. Were there any questions that you couldn't answer? Did you have to say, maybe I have to do some more research?
So on the issue of land preemptions, which I have looked into quite considerably, and there's a fellow there who wrote a book about, that was set close to Fernie, about some murders. You probably know him. I don't know the name of his book, but he and I were discussing our books, right?
Right. I think you might be referring to Keith Regular.
Keith, yes, yeah. And so we were discussing what we knew about land preemptions.
Oh, okay.
And he knew some things that related more to the prairies. And so, you know, I'm not as clear as I'd like to be on how people got out of the land preemptions, because I have researched that, you know, like how do they get it, and it's a small amount of money and blah 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 blah, and the legal status of the individuals. So I'd like to understand that better.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about it myself, but my impression is it's somewhat similar to homesteading, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, that's right.
Back in the early days.
But you see, it's important. It's kind of an important question in my book, because what would have happened to the wife? Because they had a land preemption. What would have happened, or he and the partner had the land preemption. So as far as I understand that, if the man had faced the death penalty because of what he did, she probably had no right to that land preemption. I don't think she did. And so women had no legal rights in BC until 1927.
Right. Which sort of leads me to the question. So we've got Kootenay Lake, Argenta, 1920s, maybe even earlier. How does that compare with what we see today? How have things changed? How have things remained the same, do you think?
I think what's the same is how much people love it. People love living there. They love the area. They feel fortunate all the time. They talk about, gee, I'm glad we live here. We love, even if we hit smoke in the summer, we still love it. What's changed obviously is tourism, which is gigantic here in both East and West Kootenay, where our communities are very influenced by massive numbers of tourists. Technology, obviously, and so technology sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. I think the small town people knowing each other, being familiar with each other, wanting to know, oh, I know that family name, like, checking in on different people in the community. I think that stayed the same pretty much. So I think, they're definitely a lot more modern, for sure.
And Argenta has evolved and changed as any community does, and it also became the home of war resistors and
Quakers.
Quakers.
Well, my husband's family were Quakers, and they came from Southern California.
But that was a little bit...
1952.
Yeah, that was past the era of your book, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. It was after the end of the Second World War, but they were resistors during the war in the States, and they suffered from it.
Right.
So that's another big story. Right. Another big story. I have some writing on that, actually. Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap it up. Judy, it's been a pleasure to have you as a guest, and I just wanted to ask any future plans?
I do have a plan, actually, for more writing, and I'm just really trying to stay with the program right now with the marketing and promoting part of what I do and get to where I want to be. I'm close to where I want to be with my sales. I'm doing really well. So yeah, I have another story in my mind, sort of a very huge family history story of my own family, my family origins, my seventh back great-grandfather actually came from Scotland to PEI in a ship that sunk in the bay, and all the people were survived. I got lots of stories in my family history.
Sounds like you've got some fodder there to
lots.
to look into, and some gems to mine.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
Well, congratulations. So the book is The Distance. Judy, I appreciate you being a guest, and it's always good to talk to a Kootenay author about Kootenay stories. So keep telling those stories. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. It's been a pleasure.
So this has been Talking Kootenay Books, and my name is Keith Powell.